Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, Lisette Voytko-Best. Lisette, thank you for coming on in.
Thank you for having me.
You wrote a recent piece for Forbes taking an inside look inside the rubble of Sean Diddy Combs' empire. So to start off the conversation, can you talk about the beginning when things were looking good for him, when he was on that path to becoming a billionaire that never came to fruition?
Sean Diddy Combs, aka Puff Daddy, he's one of the most totemic and biggest figures in rap and R&B history. When he founded Bad Boy Records in 1992, after just being an intern at Uptown Records, he created some of the most legendary moments of hip-hop history. Everything from stoking the East Coast, West Coast rap rivalry, which was a big thing between Tupac and the Notorious B.I.G. He also produced Biggie's posthumous #3 Billboard hitting album called Ready to Die. And he signed some really big stars. Earlier in the days, it was Mace, it was Biggie's widow, Faith Evans, and later it was folks like Machine Gun Kelly and Janelle Monáe. So, he's had a long history of just creating these stars in the hip hop and R&B space, and that's just music. There were other categories as well, which he was hugely successful in.
So let's talk about those, because he did branch out from hip hop into multiple lifestyle ventures. Can you talk about those a little bit?
The oldest lifestyle categories that Diddy expanded into was spirits. More specifically, vodka. The brand was Cîroc vodka, which is owned by Diageo, which is a British conglomerate that has a huge portfolio of different liquor brands. And that was a partnership that became a smashing success. Diddy basically became the brand, is what I was told. He brought Cîroc with him everywhere. You can find all of these photos of his parties and appearances where he literally has a bottle of the vodka in his hand. And that, generated almost $1 billion worth of income for him in the 15 years he worked with Diageo, which was insanely successful. He also forayed into fashion. A lot of people are very familiar with his Sean John brand. It was sold in Macy's, and it was, at one point doing 400 million in annual sales. And he had associated things with that as well, like fragrances and eyewear that all came under the Sean John label.
So at the height of his success, I think it is important to note Forbes never named him a billionaire, but he was almost a stone's throw away from being a billionaire. So at the height of everything, how much does Forbes estimate he was worth?
So Forbes last estimated his net worth to be $740 million in 2019. And since then, his team was claiming that he was a billionaire. They never would present any documentation to back up their claims. But, the bulk of his net worth, in that 2019 period was not just the bad boy, label and entertainment sector of his business. It was the liquor, the Diageo of it all. It wasn't just the Cîroc vodka at that point. He had also formed a joint venture with Diageo to promote a tequila called De Leon, which was a higher end tequila. And that was a little bit of an interesting diversion, whereas, the Cîroc deal was purely just like him being a spokesperson, getting paid for the marketing aspect of that. But De Leon was, both of them putting money in behind this tequila brand to make it a success. And so there was Bad Boy, there was the Diageo stuff, and then there was also Sean John, which was his fashion brand. It was, very well known across the United States, sold in Macy's, at one point doing, 400 million in annual sales, which is, that's some money right there. And also under the Sean John umbrella were things like fragrances and eyewear. So there was a lot of diversified, I would say, a lot of diversified lifestyle business, being centered around what Diddy originally created, and that was, this aesthetic and this lifestyle that was associated with rap and R&B.
So he had these multiple, incredibly successful revenue streams, whether it be alcohol, his music, which he originally was famous for, clothing line, amongst other things. And then in 2019, Forbes estimates he's worth $740 million. So bring us to more recent days when it all started crashing down. Take us to that starting point of where it came down.
Sure. So it was fall of last year. Diddy's ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, filed a $30 million lawsuit against him, alleging a slew of really horrific allegations that he beat her, he was committing sexual assault, domestic violence, forced druggings, a slew of really, really ugly allegations. And that was kind of, I would say, the tipping point of what has happened to Diddy's empire since. It's important to note that as of today, Diddy has denied every allegation that's been placed against him. He hasn't been formally charged of any crime. But that, plus the lawsuits that followed from other women and former business associates alleging some of the same things, has really put a black mark on his reputation. And that is really where you started to see his empire crumble from the outside. It was already starting to collapse from within at that point, which is, I think, also a really important thing to think about.
I want to get into that. So we saw his empire, as you say, crash from the outside, but take us to the inside before. What was going on there?
So earlier in the spring of 2023, Diddy filed a lawsuit against Diageo. He basically accused them of being racist in the sense that they weren't diverting enough, promotional and financial resources to his Cîroc vodka and his DeLeón tequila. And that really created a lot of animosity between the two parties. And that was playing out behind the scenes of the empire that was, like we said, collapsing from within before it collapsed from the outside, or fully fell apart, I guess is the better way to put it.
So when you're looking through Diageo's response, did anything stick out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. What was really fascinating is Diageo stated they hadn't treated him any differently, or the brands any differently, because he was black, and had devoted quite a lot of marketing and financial resources to making both of the brands a success. One of the really shocking things that was found out was with the DeLeón tequila, that Diageo had basically footed the bill for everything that they had been doing to launch that and rebrand that, while claiming that, Diddy had only invested $1,000 of his own dollars into the brand at that time. So there was some real, I would say, conflict between the two camps for a while before everything came to a head with the sexual assault allegations.
You noted this earlier, but when you think of Cîroc, you can't not think of Diddy. I mean, the two are synonymous. They go hand in hand. So was this partnership ending between Diageo and Diddy, was that a real loss to Diageo, a la Kanye West, Ye, leaving Adidas?
That is a great question. The answer to that is it really did not hurt Diageo's bottom line. The sources that I spoke with said that both Cîroc and DeLeón accounted for just a few percentage points of Diageo's overall sales volumes and revenues. You have to remember, when you think about Diageo, they have some absolutely massive spirits in their portfolio. We're talking Smirnoff vodka, we're talking Johnny Walker Scotch, we're talking George Clooney's Casamigos tequila, which legendarily reportedly sold for $1 billion. So those, and from what I've been made to understand from my sources, those are the types of brands that would command a lot more of the budget that would be needed to promote them and keep their dominance in the space. Not to say that a Cîroc or DeLeón couldn't eventually attain that sort of position, but it's a much longer play. It takes a much longer time.
So it's not really impacting Diageo's bottom line, but what about Diddy's? Because alcohol is a huge revenue stream for him.
Yeah, it was really the straw that broke the camel's back of his business empire crumbling, because the way that we think about as Forbes valuing these sorts of partnerships or, deals is we're saying, okay, if you're making X amount annually, for him it was around 66 million annually on average for the alcohol partnership. We're like, okay, like what is a forward multiple that can be applied to that, right? And when you say forward multiple, basically you're saying, okay, like if he's making 66 million a year, do you multiply that by 10 for its value? Do you multiply it by 12? Like you speak to, industry experts who can advise you on what, if you were to sell this income stream, what it would sell for. And that was really valuable when he was at the height of his popularity and goodwill. But, once the Diageo partnership melted, he doesn't have that to add to his net worth at that point. He can't sell it because he doesn't have it anymore. So it was much more harmful to Diddy than it was to Diageo.
So now let's move back to the outside veneer, what we saw as just average people looking. And that was after the Cassie lawsuit, a video emerged, I believe it was back in 2016, of what appeared to be on CCTV footage, Diddy assaulting Cassie at a hotel. Has he responded? What has that been like? And then I want you to take us to when the feds raided his home.
Sure. Yeah, that was a horrific video. CNN was able to obtain that surveillance footage, which then broke last fall after the sexual assault allegations came from Cassie Ventura. And the fallout from that has been really extreme. About 48 hours after the video was broadcast, Diddy posted to his Instagram an apology video. He called his behavior disgusting, among other things, but he never mentioned Cassie Ventura by name, which struck people as odd. Since then, he's scrubbed his Instagram of all posts, so that original apology video post is now gone. And there was sort of a dam that broke once Cassie Ventura filed her suit. Again, it was settled the day after she filed it, but 6 more people came forward with their own suits, their own allegations, including Diddy's former producer, Rodney Lil Rod Jones. All the same sort of horrific allegations that Cassie had talked about, sexual assault, forced druggings, domestic violence. Again, Diddy's categorically denied all of those allegations. But, in a post, I guess I would call it post-Me Too world, those things really harm your reputation and they really harm your business. And, he's kind of persona non grata at this point. He's radioactive.
And then we see the feds raiding his home. He wasn't there at the time. What was that for?
So that is a little unclear. What we do know, what the federal government has said publicly, that they raided the homes in connection with an investigation that is reportedly human trafficking. The Fed hasn't confirmed what the purpose or target of the investigation was. So that also means it's unclear if Diddy was a target of the investigation or if what was in his homes was incidental or correlating to whatever it was the government's investigating. So that remains to be determined. But again, in the hindsight of all of the different civil lawsuits and these federal raids, it's looking pretty dire for him right now.
It's looking pretty dire, and you did use a term that I think encapsulates this perfectly, and that is radioactive. So let's talk about his other business ventures and how they're impacted. So let's talk about Revolt TV, a network he founded over a decade ago and he has a stake in. What does that stake look like now, and has his fortune from that been decimated since the fallout of this?
Yes. The answer to your last question is absolutely yes. And so to back that up, Revolt TV was founded to showcase hip-hop culture, youth creators, and it had some pretty successful programming. I believe Drink Champs is one of their most famous or most popular programs. And he had a little over 50% stake in that network. And what we were led to believe was that it was an equity stake, meaning that he had financial control over the company. A source that was close to the finances of Revolt said that that wasn't true, that his equity stake essentially just controlled the voting rights of the company. So he didn't really have a lot of financial say, meaning that that stake he did have in Revolt would be worth less. If you have financial control over the company, that's worth a lot. If you're just controlling, the voting, which is essentially what decisions the business makes, it's not worth as much.
Has Revolt responded to this at all?
They have, yes. The day that they announced that Diddy no longer had any stake in the company, their CEO, Diageo Samuel, said that they are going to hand Diddy shares over to employees. It's meant to be a way of equalizing everyone's place within the company, to have it, let everyone have skin in the game, essentially. It's also meant to be a way to drive or generate wealth for employees who have come from marginalized backgrounds, in which wealth generation is a huge component of getting ahead in corporate America.
I know that hip-hop started Diddy's career, and I am curious about what this does to his music catalog, because the last time I can think of a persona non grata, like you said, in the music industry really is R. Kelly. And I'm not comparing the two and the allegations against either of them, but when you go out, no one's listening to R. Kelly anymore. So is Diddy's music catalog completely also decimated?
It's not completely worthless, and music catalogs are such an interesting thing, right? There have been so many headlines about people selling their catalogs for bonkers numbers. Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, 500 million, Katy Perry, hundreds of millions of dollars. Even Justin Bieber, I believe, has sold some of his music as well, if not all of it. And that's because, again, if you're looking at these deals, they're much like how we valued the Diageo partnership. It's a forward multiple. So if your catalog generates $10 million a year for you, you can say, okay, I'm going to, take a 12 multiple of that. That's $120 million that it can be, valued at and therefore sold at. And that's really a case-by-case basis. And when we talk about Diddy's catalog, we have to look at the bad boy roster. And we look at the bad boy roster, okay, how many people have released albums? Diddy has, obviously. There's a couple Biggie albums. And, there's aren't that many other really big artists in his portfolio. So when you think about that, my sources have said, okay, people may not listen to Diddy much anymore. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stop listening. Consumption doesn't change a lot post-scandal, but they're definitely not going to listen to Biggie. He's one of the titans in the genre, so his stuff still remains valuable, even though it has that prior association with Diddy. But it has really knocked down the value of his overall catalog, because Biggie makes up such a small portion of it, simply because he died before he really could establish much of a career and therefore have a lot of material out there. At its height, we said that Diddy's catalog, the bad boy artist roster, could be worth over $125 million. But now we've estimated around $35 million based on what's happened with him specifically.
So slashed significantly, but not completely worthless. Now, what about the other lifestyle avenues, like his eyewear line, like his fashion line?
Sure. So again, when all of these allegations started surfacing, Macy's stopped selling Sean John. They pulled it from the shelves, and that was his main driver of revenue for that brand. The other thing to remember about Sean John is that at one point it was hugely popular, making all that money, but it became less popular, became, more of an older kind of not as, hot sort of brand. It was replaced by your Supremes and other sort of streetwear brands. He had to buy it out of bankruptcy a couple years ago, so it really wasn't worth a lot, at the time of these allegations. And the eyewear has since been also removed from opticians who are carrying it, so it's virtually worthless at this point.
And what about any other assets he holds? I know he does have a real estate portfolio. He has some art. What does that look like now?
Sure. So the houses, the art, the cars, the plane, they all retain their value, minus any sort of depreciation that you would consider for cars and planes. He has a pretty impressive real estate portfolio. He owns very high-end homes in Los Angeles and Miami. They're worth over $40 million a piece. but about half of the value of his real estate is tied up in mortgages. So he has debt on those that he still has to pay back, which slashes their overall resale value. The art collection's still very valuable. He's got works by Jean-Michel Basquiat, Keith Haring, Carrie Marshall Brown. Again, those are things that you'd have to find a buyer. You'd have to go through a sale process. They'd probably have to be appraised. So it's a lengthy process. They still have some value, but, overall they're, making up a fraction of his net worth at this point.
So in 2019, Diddy was worth $740 million. Now that has been slashed. What is Forbes estimating he's worth now?
Yeah, Diddy is now worth $400 million. And that is probably something that will fluctuate and, based on market values of homes and artworks and, again, the catalog and what he has remaining in cash stores as well.
Lisette, you cover celebrities. Notably, just a few years ago, you covered Kanye West and his descent. Do you think when it comes to Diddy, all of these issues, the legal ones surrounding him, are going to impact him long term, where people will no longer listen to his music, no longer drink Cîroc? Or do you think people, maybe in time, will be able to separate the person from the product or the art from the artist? Sure.
On a macro scale, Cîroc will continue to go on. They'll be able to find other ways to market it. It's definitely not dead in the water. Same with DeLeon. In terms of the bad boy music, people may not listen to Puffy as much. He was never really that popular. People are still going to listen to people are still going to listen to Biggie. They're going to buy Biggie records. He's always going to be a classic for a reason. And, on a micro level, that's a personal choice every person has to make for themselves.
It's looking pretty bleak for Diddy right now. I mean, as you said, his fortune was cut $300 million, a little more. So what is on the horizon for him, both financially and legally?
So, again, that remains unclear because we don't know anything for sure. In terms of the civil lawsuits, those will play out in court. The important thing to remember about a civil lawsuit is that the only possible punishment is a financial penalty because they're not part of basically criminal law. They're two separate things. When it comes to what's going on with the federal government's investigation, again, we're not sure, as he hasn't been, formally accused or charged. But if he were to be charged under some sort of human trafficking allegations, that would likely be under RICO, which is the federal racketeering statute that human trafficking cases are historically prosecuted against. And punishments for those can, be also huge financial penalties, but also really lengthy prison sentences. So a human rights lawyer that I spoke with said that, she thinks there's going to be some, pretty unpleasant days coming up for him.
Well, Lisette, I appreciate your reporting. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.